Cole Turner slammed the thawing barn door against the spring wind. Mud and meltwater soaked his boots. A wedding band hung cold on a chain against his chest. Not on his hand. Never again. Then wagon wheels ground through the thawed ranch road. A lone woman stepped down. Travel dust. Tired eyes. A folded marriage contract in her shaking hand. Cole Turner. I'm your mail-order bride. Silence crushed the yard. Because inside that house already lived Sarah Turner, Cole's wife. And the truth about that marriage was a wound nobody in Montana survived untouched. By nightfall, Cole Turner's life would split wide open. Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Abigail Hayes stood beside the wagon with her gloved hand wrapped around the folded marriage paper like it was the last dry thing left in the world. Spring thaw had turned the yard to black soup. Mud sucked at her boots. Wind pushed damp cold through her travel coat. Across from her, Cole Turner said nothing. He looked once at the paper. Once at her face. Then past her shoulder toward the house. A yellow lamp burned behind the front window. Warm light. Still light. The kind a man kept for someone already inside. Abigail followed his eyes and felt the blood leave her cheeks. The woman appeared in the doorway a moment later. Thin. Quiet. One hand braced on the frame like standing itself cost effort. Sarah Turner wore a dark wool dress and a shawl pinned tight at her throat. She did not look angry. She looked tired. That made it worse. Abigail swallowed and kept her chin steady. She had crossed half a country with that paper in her valise and a preacher's promise in her ears. A husband. A ranch. A respectable beginning. Now she stood in a thawing yard staring at another woman with the same last name. Cole took the paper at last. His rough fingers opened it slow. Careful. As if paper could bite. He read without moving his mouth. His jaw tightened. Then he folded it and handed it back. You came a long way. His voice was low. Worn flat by use. Not cruel. That almost hurt more. Abigail tucked the paper against her chest. I came to the right place. Cole glanced at the wagon. One trunk. One carpet bag. No brother beside her. No father. No second wagon to carry her back east. The wind shifted. Wet earth. Rotting hay. Wood smoke. And under it all the lonely ache of land too far from town for easy mercy. Sarah stepped onto the porch. Her pale face studied Abigail. Then Cole. Not a question. Not fear. Something older. Something tired. Cole dragged a hand across his mouth. The road's bad. Abigail heard what he did not say. Too bad to send her away before dark. Too bad to pretend this was nothing. She bent for the wagon rail. Her boots sank deep in mud. Cole moved before the wagon rocked. One hand steadied the wheel. The other caught the trunk. He let go quickly. Like touching trouble. I can manage, Abigail said. I can see that. But he lifted the trunk anyway. Heavy. Easy in his arms. A man used to feed sacks and fence posts. Abigail took the carpet bag and followed him toward the porch. Sarah stepped aside. Inside, the house held heat close. Not much. But enough to sting thaw into Abigail's hands. A black stove ticked in the corner. Steam breathed from a pot. One table. 3 chairs. One patched rug. Plain. But clean in the careful way of people fighting loss one object at a time. Abigail removed her gloves finger by finger. Her hands were red and cracked from travel. Sarah noticed. Without speaking, she filled a basin with hot water. Set it on the table. A rag beside it, then a towel. The kindness landed softly. That made it heavier. Thank you, Abigail said. Sarah nodded once. Cole stayed by the door like he belonged more to the yard than the room. Rain slid from his hat brim onto the floorboards. Abigail warmed her hands above the basin. Steam curled upward. The silence grew shape. Not empty. Crowded. By the paper in her pocket. By the chain at Cole's chest where a gold band hung instead of resting on his hand. Sarah saw it too. A knock broke the quiet. 3 hard blows. Not neighborly. Cole opened the door a crack. A boy stood on the porch in town boots, breath fogging the air. He held out a folded notice. For Mr. Turner. Cole took it. The boy glanced inside. Abigail. The trunk. Sarah by the stove. His eyes widened with the hunger of small towns and loose tongues. Then he tipped his cap and hurried into the dusk. Cole shut the door and read. The muscles in his neck hardened. He folded the paper once. Too neatly. Abigail dried her hands. Bad news travels faster than people. Cole said nothing. Sarah held out her hand. He gave her the notice. Her lips tightened as she read. She passed it to Abigail. Payment due. Final demand. A sum large enough to break most families. Signed in narrow ink. Victor Hale. Even the name looked expensive. Abigail lifted her eyes. Cole had already gone to the window. Outside, the last light sank into blue mud and bare cottonwoods. Spring should have smelled like beginning. This place smelled cornered. You should have told them to wait till the herds were sold, Abigail said. Cole kept his back to her. They don't wait. Sarah eased into a chair. A cough caught in her chest. Deep. Too long. Cole turned before it ended. 2 strides. His hand steady on the back of her chair. Nothing dramatic. Just there. Solid. The kind of movement made from habit deeper than speech. Abigail looked away. Not shame. Understanding. Sarah drank water until the coughing passed. The lamp flame shifted once in the draft. Abigail saw the truth of the room then. Not a husband welcoming his bride. Not a lie either. A household stitched together against something hard. Debt. Winter. Grief. She breathed slow. I won't ask questions tonight. Cole looked at her. Really looked. As if that answer had not matched the woman he expected. Abigail held his gaze. But I won't be turned out into that road. Wind shoved rain against the wall. The wagon creaked outside. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Then looked at Cole. He stood still so long Abigail heard the stove settle. Finally he lifted the trunk again. You can take the small room off the kitchen. His voice was quiet. Not softer. Just resigned to a door already opened. Abigail picked up her carpet bag. Sarah took the lamp. They walked the narrow hall together. Light ahead. Dark boards underfoot. Rain on the roof. No one speaking. Behind them, Victor Hale's notice lay on the table like a snake too cold to strike. The little room held a narrow bed. A washstand. A single quilt folded square. Poor comfort. Honest comfort. More than she had that morning. Sarah set down the lamp. Cole placed the trunk by the bed and stepped back. Giving Abigail space. The way a man steps back from something fragile. Or dangerous. Maybe both. This is only for now, he said. Abigail rested her hand on the trunk lid. Mud drying on her hem. Marriage paper in her pocket. A stranger's house around her. For now, she said. But even then, with rain beating the ranch and debt waiting on the table and another woman carrying the Turner name, Abigail Hayes knew she had not arrived at a place where any heart would remain unchanged. Morning came gray and wet. Abigail woke to the sound of metal striking wood. Steady. Measured. A ranch sound. Not angry. Not gentle either. She dressed in the narrow room while the house still held dawn chill in its corners. Her boots were stiff with dried mud. Her fingers found the marriage paper in her bag by habit. Still there. Still useless. She left it folded deep and tied her hair back instead. The kitchen smelled of coffee gone bitter on the stove and yesterday's ashes waking to heat. Sarah sat at the table with a shawl around her shoulders. Pale again. One hand curled around a cup she was not drinking from. She looked up when Abigail entered. Not unfriendly. Just watchful. Abigail moved to the stove. Fed kindling under the black iron belly. Set flame to it. The fire caught slow, then brighter. Warmth began its patient work. "You should eat before the day starts," Sarah said. Her voice was thin but clear. Abigail turned. It was the first full sentence she had heard from her. "I've cooked on wagon fires for 2 weeks," Abigail said. "A stove feels like luxury." That almost brought a smile to Sarah's mouth. Almost. Outside, the axe struck again. Abigail glanced toward the window. Cole stood by the woodpile with his shirt dark at the shoulders from mist. Each swing split the soaked rounds clean. No wasted motion. No looking toward the house. A man working like silence could hold a roof up. Abigail found flour in the bin, salt pork in the crock, and biscuit dough half started in a bowl as if Sarah had meant to do it before her strength failed. She finished it without asking. Hands quick. Practical. The kitchen changed around the work. Board against bomb. Knife on meat. Tin pan on stove. By the time Cole came in, the room smelled of baking bread and rendered fat instead of old coffee and damp wool. He stopped just inside the door. Rain on his hat brim. Cold on his face. His eyes moved once over the table. 3 plates. Not 2. Not 1. He took off his gloves slowly. Abigail kept rolling dough. Sarah watched him over the rim of her cup. No one said a thing. That made the room louder somehow. Cole washed at the basin by the wall. Water darkened with dirt and bark stain. There were old scars across his knuckles. A fresh scrape at the base of his thumb. A white line crossing one wrist like rope had once burned him there. Abigail saw it because he did not hide it. She saw, too, the chain at his throat when he bent. The gold band knocked once against the basin edge. Not on his hand. Still not on his hand. He sat when the food was ready. A chair leg scraped. Sarah bowed her head a little. Not prayer exactly. More like endurance. Cole ate in quiet, quick bites. Abigail took smaller ones. Waiting. Watching. The wind hit the wall hard enough to rattle the window once. Cole looked toward the barn. Then to the back field. Measuring chores against weather. "The south fence will go if the creek rises again," he said. It was not offered as conversation. Only fact. Abigail buttered half a biscuit and set it on Sarah's plate when she saw the woman's hand trembling. Then she looked at Cole. "I can mend." He kept eating. "The fence?" "The fence. Roof patching. Chicken wire. Harness leather if it's not too far gone. I wasn't raised useless." Sarah lowered her eyes to hide it, but there it was again. That almost smile. Cole chewed once more. Swallowed. "You don't know the land. I know what broken things look like." His gaze lifted to hers then. Brief. Sharp. And for 1 second Abigail knew she had stepped against something hidden and sore. Cole pushed back from the table. "I'll see the fence." He reached for his coat. Sarah coughed. A bad one. Deep enough to bend her forward. Cole was beside her before the chair stopped moving. His hand steadied her shoulder. His face stayed hard, but his fingers gentled against the shawl. Abigail rose and poured hot water into a mug with a little honey from the crock beside the stove. She handed it over. Cole took it without speaking and held it while Sarah drank. There it was again. Not romance. Not ease. Duty worn smooth by repetition. Something built in the place where love should have sat. Abigail stood still and let the shape of that settle, Later, when the rain slackened, she carried scraps to the hens and crossed the yard with her skirt pinned up from the mud. The thaw had eaten the ground to the roots. Black earth. Sour water. Hoof prints filling with sky. The barn leaned at one corner. The corral gate hung lower than it should. A ranch stretched thin. Not ruined yet, but tired. Cole was at the south line with hammer blows carrying over the wet field. Abigail did not go to him. Not yet. She circled the house instead and found the wash line sagging, 2 buckets overturned, and a pile of feed sacks stiff with old use. She righted the buckets. Shook out the sacks. Stacked split kindling under the porch where rain could not steal it. Useful work. Quiet work. By noon the place looked less abandoned by luck. More held. When she came in with cold hands and straw on her hem, she heard voices from the front room. Sarah's first. Low. Tense. Then Cole's. Lower still. Abigail paused by the kitchen door, not eavesdropping so much as trapped by the sound of a wound breaking open. She needs to leave before Hal hears talk, Sarah said. He already hears everything. You know what he'll do. Silence. Then the scrape of boots on floorboards. He's already doing it. Sarah's answer came with strain under it. This is because of me. No. That debt stayed because of me. Another silence. Longer. Abigail should have moved. Should have rattled a pot or opened a cupboard to announce herself. But stillness held her there. Cole spoke next, and his voice had changed. Not angry. Something worse. A man speaking from a grave he had climbed into on purpose. You were alone. Each word came spare and blunt. With a dead husband. A burned field. Winter coming. No stock worth selling. No kin nearby. Hale wanted the land. Folks would have let him take it and called it law. Abigail gripped the doorframe. Rain ticked from the eaves outside. Sarah said nothing. Cole went on. I put my name on the debt because mine was the only name he couldn't shove aside in one day. A chair creaked. Perhaps Sarah sinking into it. Perhaps shame. Perhaps relief too tired to stand. You married me for that paper, she said at last. Cole did not answer right away. When he did, the words came so low Abigail nearly missed them. I married you because town mouths were already turning. The room beyond went still as church. Abigail felt the cold inside the house now more than the cold outside. Not a husband stolen. Not a faithless man playing 2 women against each other. A bargain made in smoke and hunger and reputation. 1 woman rescued from ruin. 1 man buried under the rescue. She stepped back then, careful with the boards, and took up the empty wood box as if that had always been her reason for standing there. She opened the back door louder than needed and went out into the yard. Wind met her face. Sharp. Honest. She crossed to the woodpile fast enough to feel foolish for it. Cole saw her coming. He drove the axe into the block and waited. Abigail set down the box. Neither of them spoke at first. The sky hung low and white above the fields. Somewhere far off, water moved under thawed banks with the sound of something waking up mean. I heard enough, Abigail said. Cole's jaw set. He did not ask how much. That wasn't my aim. No. He looked past her toward the house. Toward the small square of window glass where kitchen warmth glowed faint through gray day. Then back to the split logs. His hands were red from cold. Raw at the palm creases. A man using himself up in plain sight. Abigail picked up one of the heavier logs and laid it in the box. Then another. And another. I don't judge her, she said. He did not move. I don't judge you either. That got him. Not in his face. In the stillness. The kind that comes when a struck bell stops shaking but the sound has not died. Mud clung to Abigail's boots. The box grew heavier between them. At last Cole pulled the axe free from the stump. Most people do. His voice was flat again. Abigail lifted the box with both hands. Most people weren't there. She carried the wood toward the house. Not because the talk was finished. Because it was not. Behind her, after one long moment, the axe began again. Steady. Measured. But different now. As if each strike landed in a place that had not felt warmth in a very long time. The thaw worsened by morning. Rain had stopped, but the yard still shone black and slick beneath a low white sky. Water dripped from the eaves in a slow, patient rhythm. Abigail came into the kitchen to find Cole already standing at the table with Victor Hale's notice spread flat beneath his hand. Sarah sat near the stove, wrapped in her shawl, her color poor in the weak light. Cole did not look at either woman. He only stared at the paper as if willing the numbers to change. Abigail crossed to the stove and set coffee to warm. The room smelled of damp wool, iron, and old ashes. She took out flour and lard without asking. Work first. Questions after. Cole finally folded the notice and slid it into his coat. The east roads wash through, he said. Creek took half the bank in the night. Abigail paused with her hands in the dough. That was one road gone. Maybe the only easy one. Sarah lowered her eyes. No one said what all three understood. The world had just made the choice harder. Cole reached for his hat. I'll ride to the lower crossing. To see if it's passable? Abigail asked. He gave one short nod. If it isn't? He settled the hat on his head. Then you stay. The words were plain. Not invitation. Not kindness. Just fact forced out by weather and mud and distance. Abigail returned to the dough, but something inside her steadied. Not hope. Not yet. Only ground under her feet. Sarah watched Cole button his coat. There's no room in the barn roof for another hard rain, she said quietly. Cole's hand stopped at the last button. His gaze shifted toward the window. Toward the sagging line of the outbuildings. One more burden. One more leak. One more thing failing before his eyes. I'll see it after the crossing, he said. Then he left. Cold air pushed in with him. Then out. The house shrank quieter once the door shut. Abigail set biscuits in the oven and turned towards Sarah. You knew the road might go. Sarah's fingers tightened around her cup. In spring, roads always go. That isn't what I meant. Sarah looked into the stove fire instead of at Abigail. Orange light moved across her tired face. For a little while, she said, the weather decides for all of us. Abigail let that settle. Not surrender. Not acceptance either. Just a woman too worn to wrestle every sorrow at once. By noon the sky had lifted a little, but the cold held sharp in the boards and window glass. Abigail carried feed to the hens, then hauled in wood enough for the night. She found a loose hinge on the pantry door and repaired it with a bent nail and twine. Small work. Useful work. The kind that quiets a room without asking permission. When she came back from the yard, Sarah had laid out old account books on the table. Thin ledgers. Receipts. A jar of coins that looked too light to matter. Abigail set down the wood and saw Sarah's hand tremble over the figures. You should lie down, Abigail said. Sarah shook her head. If Hale comes again, I want to know what we still have. Again. The words sat heavy. Abigail untied her apron. Then I'll count with you. Sarah looked up. A little surprised. Abigail sat across from her and opened the first ledger. Ink. Numbers. Feed. Seed. Doctor. Lumber. Always a payment due somewhere. Always less coming in than going out. The house felt even smaller with the truth of it spread across the table. Then Abigail saw it. A line repeated across 3 pages. Interest recalculated. Late fee added. Freight charge duplicated. Not enough to shock a careless eye. Enough to bleed a ranch slow. She touched the entry. Did Hale's office write these? Sarah nodded. His clerk brings the papers. Abigail read the figures again. Her stomach tightened. Not proof. Not yet. But the shape of something mean. The back door opened hard enough to strike the wall. Cole came in with creek water to his knees and mud up the side of his boots. His face gave the answer before his words did. The lower crossing's gone. Sarah closed her eyes. Abigail looked at the ledgers. Then at the man standing in the doorway, wet and silent and cornered from every side. Cole removed his gloves finger by finger. The North Road may open in 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Abigail repeated. He nodded once. Maybe 3 if the thaw turns worse. The stove popped. A hen clucked outside. Somewhere water kept moving where no one could stop it. Abigail rose and poured hot coffee into a mug. She held it out. Cole hesitated, then took it. His cold fingers brushed hers. Brief. Accidental. But real. Sarah gathered herself and spoke before the silence could harden. Then it's settled. Cole looked at her. Then at Abigail. Nothing in his face yielded easily. Still, he reached into his coat and drew out Hale's notice. He laid it beside the ledgers. Beside the jar of coins. Beside the hard truth already sitting in the room. You stay until the road clears, he said. His voice was low. Roughened by weather and pride. You earn your keep if you can. Abigail met his eyes. I can. No claims. The words came harder now. Like boards nailed over a broken window. No talk in town. No preacher called. No paper waved in my house. Abigail rested her hand over the folded marriage contract in her pocket. Then let it fall away. I didn't come here to shame anyone. Sarah looked between them. Tired, but steady. For now, she said, we keep this place standing. That was the agreement. Not spoken fancy. Not signed. Made of mud, weather, debt, and necessity. Abigail turned back to the table and pulled the nearest ledger toward her. Cole drank his coffee standing. Sarah counted coins with thin, careful fingers. Outside, the thaw kept tearing at the roads. Inside, 3 strangers sat in one warm room and built a truce strong enough to last until spring gave them a different kind of trouble. Morning settled over the ranch in layers. Pale sky. Wet fields. Smoke rising thin from the stovepipe. The yard still wore the scars of thaw, but the ground had begun to hold. Not firm. Not safe. Only less willing to swallow a boot hole. Abigail was up before the light had fully found the windows. By the time Cole came in from the barn, the stove was hot, biscuits were wrapped in a towel, and a pot of beans had been stretched with onion and the last of the salt pork. He stopped at the door. Mud on his boots. Cold in his shoulders. His eyes moved from the table to Abigail's rolled sleeves. Then to Sarah, already seated with a blanket over her knees and color a shade better than yesterday. No one spoke for a moment. Then Cole removed his gloves and sat. That was enough. The room accepted him. After breakfast, work split them apart and tied them closer. Cole went to the south pasture with posts, wire, and hammer. Abigail carried feed, gathered eggs, and patched the torn apron of a grain sack to make it useful 1 week longer. Sarah sorted dry goods, measured flour, and marked down what remained in the ledger with careful fingers. The house sounded different now. Cupboards opening. Boots crossing boards. A broom whispering along the floor. Not busy noise. Living noise. By mid-morning Abigail crossed to the pump with 2 pails. The wind had softened. Sunlight broke through in narrow gold strips over the barn roof. She could hear Cole's hammer from the far fence line. Steady. Patient. A man speaking to the land in the only language he trusted. She set the buckets down, rolled up her sleeves, and found the wash kettle still half full from yesterday. So she lit another fire under it. Fed more wood. Hung shirts and towels across the line once the water warmed. When the first clean cloth began moving in the breeze, the yard looked different. less forsaken. More claimed. Sarah noticed from the porch. She stood with one hand on the post, watching the white cloth lift and fall. "My mother always said a wash line makes a place look defended," she said. Abigail smiled faintly. She was right. Sarah's gaze moved over the yard. The stacked kindling. The swept step. The mended grain sacks folded by the wall. For the first time, her face loosened. Not much. But enough. Then a crash broke from the barn. Sharp. Wood against wood. A horse snorted hard. Abigail was moving before the sound fully died. She reached the barn to find one of the side stall latches torn loose and a gray mare half sideways against the rail, eyes rolling white. Cole was already there, one hand on the bridle, shoulder pressed into the mare's neck to keep her from breaking a leg in panic. "Hold the gate," he said. Nothing else. Abigail caught the hanging rail before it swung wide. The mare struck once. Twice. Then settled enough for Cole to guide her back. His breath smoked in the dim barn light. Dust and old hay drifted through the beam from the loft. He checked the mare's leg with rough, careful hands. No wasted touch. No soothing words. Only action. Abigail kept the gate steady until he nodded. The latch had split clean where damp wood had rotted through. Another weak point. Another thing winter had eaten from the inside. "I can cut a brace for it," Abigail said. Cole looked at the broken latch. Then at her. "You know how?" "I know how to measure. And I know how not to lose fingers." The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. Not a smile. But near enough to count. By noon she had the brace cut from scrapboard, fitted rough but square, and nailed into place while Cole repaired tack at the bench. He said little. Only once reaching over to straighten the angle before she hammered the final nail. His hand brushed hers. Quick. Workmanlike. Still, something passed in that small correction. Not tenderness. Trust beginning to learn its own name. They carried the harness leather back to the house together. Inside, the warmth met them with the smell of bread rising and broth simmering. Sarah had done what strength allowed. Abigail took the rest without comment. Chopped carrots. Stirred the pot. Set bowls on the table. Cole washed at the basin. Water darkened under his hands. When he reached for the towel, Sarah coughed and nearly dropped the spoon. Abigail took the pot from her before it could spill. Again that silent habit. Again that old wound showing itself through action instead of speech. During the meal, Sarah asked about the south fence. Cole answered in 3 words. Abigail described the mare's panic, the broken latch, the brace now holding firm. Sarah listened. Then looked once at Cole. "You would have needed half a day more without her." Cole tore bread in his hands. Did not deny it. A wagon rolled somewhere far off on the road toward town. Faint. Then gone. But all 3 heard it. And thought the same name. Victor Hale. Debt without mercy. After supper, Abigail darned socks by lamplight while Sarah sorted buttons into a small tin and Cole sat near the stove sharpening a draw knife for morning work. Steel whispered on stone. Firelight moved across the walls. No one filled the room with needless talk. They did not have that kind of ease yet. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt like strangers guarding corners. It felt like tired people keeping watch together. When the lamp burned lower, Sarah rose first. Cole stood at once to steady her, then stopped as if remembering Abigail could see it. Sarah only touched his sleeve and moved on. Abigail lowered her eyes to the sock in her lap and said nothing. Cole returned to the knife. One slow pass. Then another. Outside, the thawing dark pressed close against the windows. Inside, the stove held red heat. The table held 3 cups. The hooks by the door held 3 coats. And in that small house, stitched by labor and held by weather, the shape of a home began to form before any of them were ready to speak its name. Morning came sharp and clear. The rain had gone. Frost lay thin across the pasture like glass dust. Cole was already outside when Abigail stepped from the house with a bucket of feed. The sky stretched pale and endless above the fields. For a moment the ranch looked peaceful, almost forgiving. Abigail scattered grain for the hens. They rushed her boots with clucks and flapping wings. Behind the barn Cole tightened a saddle cinch and checked a horse's hooves. He moved with quiet efficiency. No wasted motion. The kind of rhythm a man built after years of fighting the same hard ground. Abigail carried water to the trough. When she returned, Cole stood watching the north road. Still. Listening. The air carried something distant. A wagon. Not close. But coming. Cole did not speak. He simply went to the fence rail and leaned his weight against it. Abigail followed his gaze. The road curved through the cottonwoods beyond the ridge. Empty. Still. But Cole kept watching. After a long moment he turned away. "Feed the bay mare before noon," he said. "She favors the left hind when she stands too long." Abigail nodded. But she had already seen it yesterday. Another small thing she now knew about this place. Work passed steady through the morning. Cole rode the south pasture checking the fence line. Abigail cleaned tack and patched a tear in the chicken wire. Sarah sat near the open door with the ledger on her lap and the sun warming her shoulders. The house felt quieter today. Too quiet. Around midday the dog barked once. Short. Warning. Cole appeared at the yard gate moments later, riding fast. Not panicked. But tight in the shoulders. Abigail saw it the moment he swung down. "What is it?" Cole removed his glove slowly. "Tracks." "What kind?" He looked toward the north pasture. 4 riders. Abigail felt the yard shrink a little. "Passing through?" "No." "One word." "Certain." He led the horse to the trough and let it drink. His hand stayed on the reins longer than needed. Sarah had come to the doorway. Her shawl hung loose around her thin shoulders. "From Hale?" she asked. Cole did not answer right away. That was answer enough. The dog growled low at the fence. Then the riders appeared. 4 men. Dark coats. Dust on their boots from roads already drying toward town. They rode slow. Not like travelers. Like men inspecting something that might soon belong to them. The lead rider tipped his hat back and smiled as he reached the gate. Abigail noticed the way his eyes moved. Counting the barn. The horses. The stack of firewood. Property. "Morning," he called. Cole stepped forward. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just solid. "What do you want?" The man's grin widened. "Just riding the line for Mr. Hale." His horse shifted under him. Leather creaked in the quiet yard. "Fine line here," the rider said. "Shame about debts." Cole's jaw tightened. Abigail could see the muscle move along his cheek. "Turn around." The man ignored the order. His gaze drifted toward the house. Toward Sarah. Then to Abigail standing by the pump. "Well now," he said lightly. "Didn't know Turner had company." Abigail felt the words crawl over the yard like oil. Cole took one step closer to the gate. "That's close enough." The other rider said nothing. But their horses moved slightly apart. "Easy." "Prepared." The lead rider leaned forward in his saddle. "Mr. Hale sends his regards," he said. "He's wondering when the ranch will be vacated." No one answered. The wind moved across the pasture. Fence wire hummed faintly. The rider shrugged. "No rush. Just don't damage anything that'll belong to him soon." Cole's hand rested near the gate latch. Not gripping it. Just there. "Ready." "You've seen enough," he said. "Ride." For a moment the man held his gaze. Then he laughed softly and turned his horse. The other 3 followed. Slow. Unbothered. They rode down the road the same way they came. Like men already measuring curtains for another man's house. The yard stayed silent long after the hoofbeats faded. Sarah leaned harder against the doorframe. Cole finally stepped back from the gate. Abigail saw his hands now. Both of them clenched. He looked toward the barn. Then the pasture. Then the house. Calculating. Protecting. A man measuring the shape of a fight he never wanted. "They'll come back," Abigail said quietly. Cole nodded once. Yes. The frost had melted from the ground by then. The thaw was returning. Soft earth. Weak fences. Open roads. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Victor Hale had begun closing his hand around the ranch. Wind came in from the north that night. Cold again. The kind that carried dust across the hardening yard and made the barn boards groan. Abigail sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open under the lamplight. The house was quiet. Sarah had gone to bed early, her cough lingering in the back room. Cole sat near the stove sharpening a draw knife. Steel on stone. Slow. Even. A sound that filled the empty spaces of the house. Abigail turned another page. Numbers marched across the paper in careful ink. Feed. Seed. Doctor. Freight. Interest. Always interest. The flame flickered when the wind touched the walls. Abigail leaned closer. Something about the columns bothered her. Not the size of the debt. That part was plain enough. It was the pattern. She ran a finger along the lines. Same charge. Same fee. Written again. Then again 2 months later. Cole stopped sharpening. Find something. He did not ask it like a question. Abigail tilted the book toward him. Look here. Cole rose and stepped to the table. His shadow fell across the pages. She pointed to the entry. Freight charge for winter grain. Cole nodded. That shipment came from the rail depot. Abigail slid her finger down the page. Then here again. 2 months later. Cole frowned. That's wrong. Yes. Abigail turned another page. And here. 3 times. Same charge. Same amount. Sarah's careful handwriting recorded the payments. Small ones. Every coin scraped together. But the charge kept returning. Cole rested his hands on the table. Heavy. Still. The lamplight showed the tight line across his mouth. Hale's clerk wrote those invoices, he said quietly. Abigail nodded. I thought so. The wind pushed harder against the house. For a moment the flame bent low and thin. Abigail reached for another ledger. Older. Worn at the corners. She opened it carefully. Look here. The same pattern. Year after year. Freight. Interest. Late fee. Sometimes on the same day. Cole's jaw tightened. That's how he keeps the debt growing. Abigail looked at him. Not growing. She tapped the page. Bleeding. The room fell silent. Only the stove ticking and the wind outside. Cole leaned back slowly. A man used to fighting storms. Used to losing small pieces of land to flood or frost. But this was not weather. This was a trap built with ink. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Sarah stood in the doorway, pale in the lamplight. You should both be asleep, she said softly. Abigail slid the ledger toward her. Come see this. Sarah crossed the room slowly. Her hand rested on the chair before she sat. Abigail showed her the pages. One by one. The repeated charges. The doubled interest. The freight paid 3 times. Sarah's fingers trembled as she touched the ink. We paid that, she whispered. I remember. Cole watched her. Not speaking. Abigail turned another page. Did anyone else check these? Sarah shook her head. The clerk brought them sealed. And Hale? He never came himself. Abigail leaned back. The discovery sat between them like a small fire just beginning to breathe. "If these numbers are wrong," she said quietly, "then the dead isn't what he says it is." Cole's eyes moved to the window. Dark fields beyond the glass. Hale's riders somewhere on the roads. Waiting. Counting. "And proving that," Cole said slowly, "won't be easy." Abigail closed the ledger. "No." She rested her hand on the worn cover. "But it's something." The wind eased outside. The stove breathed steady heat. Sarah looked from Abigail to Cole. For the first time since Abigail had arrived, there was something new in her tired eyes. Not fear. Not surrender. Hope. Small. Fragile. But alive. Cole picked up the draw knife again. Not to sharpen it. Just to hold it. The blade caught the lamplight. "If Hale's been cheating the books," he said quietly, "then this ranch might not belong to him after all." Abigail met his gaze across the table. Outside, the dark prairie stretched wide and silent. But somewhere in those silent miles, a fight had just begun to take shape. Night came quiet. Too quiet. The wind had dropped with the sunset, leaving the prairie stretched under a cold sky and a thin slice of moon. Inside the house, the stove burned low but steady. Sarah slept in the back room. Her cough had been bad that evening. Cole sat at the table with the ledgers stacked beside him. Not reading. Just staring at the pages as if the ink might confess something new. Abigail stitched a tear in one of Cole's work shirts. Needle through cloth. Pull. Again. The small work filled the silence. Outside, a horse shifted in the barn. Leather creaked softly. Nothing unusual. Still, Cole's head lifted. He listened. The prairie carried sounds strange at night. A man learned the difference between wind and trouble. The dog barked once. Sharp. Cut short. Cole stood before the echo died. He moved to the window. Dark yard. Still barn. Fence line black against the sky. Then the smell came. Thin at first. Sharp. Smoke. Abigail smelled it too. "Cole?" He was already moving. The door flew open. Cold air rushed inside. The barn glowed faint orange along one wall. Not moonlight. Fire. Cole ran. Abigail followed across the yard. Mud sucked at their boots. The barn door stood open. Inside, flames crawled along the dry haystack near the far stall. Not an accident. Too neat. Too sudden. Cole grabbed a water bucket and threw the first splash against the wall of fire. Steam burst upward. But the flames climbed higher, licking the beams. Abigail seized the shovel by the door and started dragging burning hay away from the pile. The smoke thickened fast. The gray mare screamed and kicked against her stall rail. Cole cut the rope and slapped her flank hard. Out. The horse bolted into the night. Another bucket. Another. But the fire kept breathing. Greedy. Alive. Cole ripped open the side gate and dragged 2 more horses into the yard. Their hooves thundered across the frozen patches of ground. Abigail coughed as smoke burned her throat. Then she saw it. The hay pile. Only one side burned. The other still dry. A dark shape lay beside it. She kicked it clear. An oil rag. Still wet. Cole saw it too. His face went hard as iron. "Hale," Abigail rasped. Cole did not answer. He did not need to. Footsteps sounded behind them. Sarah stood in the yard wrapped in her shawl, pale against the dark. Her eyes widened at the fire climbing the barn beams. "Cole? Stay back." The command came rough. Cole and Abigail worked the buckets until the flames slowed. Then weakened. Then died down into black smoke and glowing straw. The barn wall stood scorched. Half the hay gone. The roof beam cracked but held. Cole leaned against the stall rail, breathing hard. Abigail wiped soot across her sleeve. The night seemed colder now. More dangerous. The dog began growling low toward the road. Hoofbeats followed. Slow. Unhurried. 4 riders emerged from the darkness beyond the fence. The same men. Hale's men. The lead rider tipped his hat again. That same easy smile. "Looks like you folks had a little trouble tonight." Cole stepped forward into the yard. The firelight caught the soot across his face. "You did this?" The rider shrugged. "Barn fires happen." His horse stamped once. The men behind him watched the ranch like spectators at a show. "Mr. Hale worries about his property," the rider continued. "Would be a shame if more accidents happen before you move out." Abigail felt the words like cold iron. Cole said nothing. His hands hung loose at his sides. But the quiet around him had changed. The rider studied him a moment longer. Then turned his horse. "Sleep light, Turner." The riders disappeared into the dark. Their hoofbeats faded slow across the frozen road. The yard fell silent again. Only smoke drifting from the barn. Sarah stood trembling near the porch. Abigail walked to her and took her arm. Cole remained near the barn door, looking at the scorched beams, the ruined hay, the oil rag in the dirt. He bent and picked it up, held it in his hand. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he looked toward the road where the riders had vanished. His voice came low. "Cold. They've started it." The prairie answered with silence. But inside the quiet yard, something had shifted. The fight was no longer coming. It had arrived. Morning found the ranch smelling of smoke. The barn wall stood black where the fire had climbed. Charred boards. Half the hay gone. Cold ash drifting across the yard. Cole was already outside when the first pale light touched the cottonwoods. He worked in silence. New boards hauled from the shed. Hammer rising and falling. Each strike sharp in the quiet air. Abigail stepped onto the porch with a bucket of water. The ground was stiff again from the night cold. The yard looked smaller now. Wounded. But standing. Cole did not look toward the house. He drove another nail. Then another. The rhythm was steady. Hard. Like a man refusing to let the night win. Sarah watched from the doorway wrapped in her shawl. "You should eat first," she called softly. Cole kept working. "I'll eat when the wall stands." Abigail carried the bucket toward the barn. Smoke still clung to the beams. Inside, the horses shifted uneasily. She spoke low to the gray mare and laid a hand along the animal's neck. The horse calmed. Abigail stepped back into the yard. Cole had already braced the burn beam with a fresh post. He tested it with both hands. Solid. "Fire won't take it today," he muttered. Abigail set the water bucket down. "You're building like they're coming back." Cole wiped soot from his hands with a rag. "They will. No doubt in it. None at all." The morning moved fast after that. Cole checked every latch. Every gate. Every hinge that winter had weakened. The ranch slowly changed under his hands. Boards tightened. Rails straightened. Tools laid where they could be reached quickly. Not repair work now. Preparation. Abigail saw it clearly. The quiet rancher who had once only endured the land was gone. In his place stood a man measuring ground. Defending it. By midday Cole saddled 2 horses. Abigail stepped out from the barn as he tightened the cinch. "You riding somewhere?" Cole nodded once. "Town." "For what?" He checked the rifle scabbard and slid the weapon inside. "For witnesses." Abigail frowned. "Hale owns half the town." Cole mounted. "Not the truth." He turned the horse toward the road. Then stopped. Looked back at the house. At Sarah standing in the doorway. At Abigail beside the barn. For a moment the man who spoke little seemed ready to say more. But words were not his way. Instead he pointed toward the barn. "Keep the door barred after dark." Then he rode. Dust lifted behind the horse as it climbed the ridge road toward town. The yard grew quiet again. But not helpless. Abigail spent the afternoon hauling water and stacking what hay remained under the repaired roof. Sarah sorted through the ledgers again at the table. Every now and then she paused. Listening. Waiting. Toward evening Abigail carried wood to the porch. The sun was sinking red behind the pasture. Long shadows stretched across the yard. The kind that made a place feel both lonely and watched. Hoofbeats finally came from the road. Abigail straightened. Cole rode back into the yard with two men behind him. Older men. Weathered. Ranchers by the look of their hats and stiff shoulders. Cole dismounted. "These men knew the freight shipment," he said. "They hauled it." The taller rancher spat into the dirt. "Turner paid that freight clean 2 winters ago." The other man nodded. "Paid it in full." Sarah stepped forward slowly. Her hand trembled against the porch rail. Cole held up the ledger. And Hale charged it again. The men studied the pages. Faces hardening. "That ain't a mistake," the taller man said. "That's theft." Abigail watched Cole then. Really watched him. His shoulders were straight. His voice steady. Not the quiet man who once endured the dead alone. A man stepping into the fight. "We'll speak in town tomorrow," Cole said. The two ranchers nodded. Truth carried weight when men stood behind it. The sun slipped lower. Firelight soon replaced daylight in the kitchen. Cole closed the barn door and set the new bar across it. The ranch was quiet again. But the quiet had changed. This was no longer a man hiding from loss. It was a man preparing to defend what was his. And in the growing dark of the prairie evening, Cole Turner had finally chosen his ground. Morning broke clear and cold. The sky stretched wide and blue over the prairie. Cole saddled the bay horse while the frost still clung to the grass. The ranch stood quiet behind him. Barn repaired. Fence line straight again. Smoke rising thin from the kitchen stove. Abigail stood near the porch rail watching him. Sarah sat wrapped in her shawl with the ledger resting on her knees. Neither woman spoke. Cole tightened the saddle cinch. Checked the rifle once. Then lifted the ledger from Sarah's hands. "You ready?" Abigail asked. Cole nodded. He did not say more. The road to town cut across the ridge and dropped into the valley where the buildings sat low against the wind. Dust lifted behind the horse as he rode. The prairie felt endless. But word traveled fast on it. By the time Cole reached the town street, men were already gathering near the general store. Ranchers. Freight haulers. A few townsfolk who had heard whispers of the barn fire. Victor Hale stood on the boardwalk outside the bank. Tall. Well-dressed. His coat dark and clean against the dust of the street. Two of his riders leaned against the rail behind him. They watched Cole ride in. Smiling faintly. Cole dismounted slowly. Boots striking the dirt with quiet weight. He walked straight toward the boardwalk. The ledger hung at his side. Hale spread his hands in greeting. "Mr. Turner." His voice carried easily across the street. "Come to discuss your debt?" Cole stepped onto the boardwalk. The wood creaked under his boots. He placed the ledger on the rail between them. "You've been charging freight twice." Hale barely glanced down. "A clerical matter perhaps." Cole opened the pages. Turned them toward the gathered men. Inclines. Dates. Numbers repeated. 3 times. The freight hauler stepped forward. A broad man with sunburned cheeks and a stiff hat brim. "That shipment was paid clean 2 winters ago," he said. His voice carried farther than Hale expected. Another rancher nodded. "I saw the receipt myself." Murmurs began moving through the crowd. Low. Uncomfortable. Hale's smile thinned. "Accounting errors happen," he said smoothly. Cole said nothing. He simply turned another page. Another charge. Another fee. The rancher beside the freight hauler leaned closer. That interest ain't right either. Hale's rider shifted behind him, hands resting near their belts. The street grew still. The sheriff stepped from the doorway of the saloon. Slow. Watching. Cole's voice came low. Flat. You built the debt with lies. The words settled hard on the boardwalk. Hale's expression changed then. Not anger. Calculation. He lifted the ledger and flipped through the pages quickly, then closed it. This proves nothing. Cole looked toward the men gathered around the rail, then let the sheriff look. The sheriff stepped forward. His boots thudded once on the boards. He took the ledger, turned the pages slowly. 1, 2, 3. His brow lowered. That's not bookkeeping, he said. That's fraud. The crowd shifted again. Voices rising now. Hale's rider straightened, but the sheriff remained where he stood, between Hale and the street. You'll answer for these numbers, he said calmly. Hale's jaw tightened. For the first time the easy confidence slipped. Cole did not move, did not speak. He simply stood there while the truth worked its way through the gathered men like wind through tall grass. The freight hauler spat into the dust. Turner's been paying a crooked ledger. Another rancher spoke up. Means the land ain't Hale's after all. The boardwalk felt smaller suddenly. The power had shifted. Hale stepped down from the rail, his voice colder now. This isn't finished. Cole met his eyes. No. Two men from the crowd stepped closer to Cole's side. Then another. Witnesses. Neighbors. Not friends perhaps, but men who recognized the shape of a theft when they saw one. The sheriff closed the ledger. This will go before the county judge. Hale said nothing more. He turned and walked toward the bank door. His riders followed. The street remained silent long after he disappeared inside. Cole picked up the ledger. The wind moved dust across the road. For the first time since the debt had been spoken aloud, the weight on his shoulders had shifted. Not gone, but lighter. The truth had stepped into the daylight. And in a small prairie town where men lived by their word and their work, daylight had a way of deciding who kept their land. Spring settled slowly over the Turner ranch. The thaw finished its work. Mud dried into firm earth. Green pushed through the pasture in thin stubborn lines. Morning sunlight lay warm across the barn roof where the charred boards had once blackened the wall. Cole stood near the fence with a hammer in one hand and a fresh rail balanced across the posts. The ranch sounded different now. Hands scratching. Wind soft through the cottonwoods. The quiet labor of a place no longer waiting for trouble. He drove the last nail into the rail. One clean strike. Then another. The fence held straight. Abigail came across the yard with a bucket of grain. Her sleeves were rolled high. Flour dust marked the front of her apron. The hens followed her steps like she carried the sun in her hands. Cole watched her scatter the grain. Small movements. Sure. Natural now. As if the ranch had known her longer than a few short weeks. She finished feeding and leaned against the fence beside him. You'll run out of fences to fix at this rate. Cole looked across the pasture. Plenty more work. His voice was quiet, but it carried something new. Not the heaviness of debt. Not the strain of a fight waiting to break loose. Just a man measuring his land again. Behind them the porch door opened. Sarah stepped out slowly. The spring air touched her face. The cough that once haunted the house had softened these past weeks. Still there, but weaker. She lowered herself into the rocking chair Cole had repaired the night before. The chair creaked gently. Warm sunlight rested across her shawl. Abigail glanced back toward her. She looks better. Cole nodded once. She does. The words were simple, but they carried more than he meant to say aloud. The road beyond the ridge remained quiet. Victor Hale had not returned. Word of the sheriff's Ledger investigation had moved fast across the county. Faster than Hale could stop it. Abigail brushed her hands clean on her apron. Town will talk about this for years. Cole rested his arms on the fence rail. Town always talks. Abigail smiled faintly. Yes. But this time they'll remember who stood their ground. The wind lifted lightly across the pasture. Grass bent in soft waves. Cole watched it move. A man could spend years working land and still forget how peaceful it looked when the fight was over. Sarah called softly from the porch. Abigail. Abigail crossed the yard and climbed the steps. Sarah handed her the old ledger. The same worn book that had nearly taken the ranch from them. "Burn it," Sarah said quietly. Abigail hesitated. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded. "I don't want that book sitting in the house anymore." Abigail carried it to the fire pit beside the barn. Cole watched from the fence. The pages curled quickly once the flame touched them. Ink turned black. Then gone. Numbers. Debt. Threat. All of it lifting away in gray smoke that drifted across the pasture. Abigail stood there until the last page collapsed into ash. Then she turned back toward the house. Cole was still waiting at the fence. Neither spoke for a moment. The ranch stretched wide around them. Sunlight. Fresh grass. A barn that still stood. Abigail leaned against the rail beside him. "So what happens now?" Cole studied the fields. The barn. The porch where Sarah rocked gently in the warm air. Then he looked at Abigail. The same woman who had arrived with a folded marriage paper and nowhere else to go. "You stay," he said. The words were plain. Simple. But they carried weight. Abigail met his gaze. "For the work?" Cole shook his head once. "No." The wind moved softly through the yard. Abigail glanced toward the porch. Sarah watched them quietly. Not with sadness. Not with worry. Only calm. A house that had survived the winter. A life that had found its shape again. Abigail rested her hands on the fence rail. The wood warmed beneath her palms. "All right," she said softly. Cole returned his gaze to the pasture. The land stretched wide under the rising spring sun. And for the first time in many seasons, the Turner Ranch felt like a place where tomorrow might come quietly. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.